Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Courageous Choice podcast. I'm super honored today that my good friend and a personal mentor of mine, Joan Clark, has joined us. Thank you so much for being with us today, Joan.
Thank you, Jamie, for having me.
So, I am really excited to introduce you to the audience here. So, those who don't know Joan, Joan Clark is the founder and CEO of J.M. Clark and Company. She's an executive coach, a consultant, and the author of Common Sense Leadership. If you haven't read it, you should get it. It's a practical guide to making, leading, and managing teams simple. With over 30 years of experience as a human resources executive with a passion for leadership development, Joan partners with organizations and individuals to help them grow into the next best version of themselves. She's known for her practical, down-to-earth approach, helping individuals discover and live their best lives, and with leaders and teams to bring clarity, courage, and results. So how apropos that we'd be talking about leadership courage today. Thank you so much, Joan. So, you've helped me personally at different points in my career, navigating change, uh, thinking about what is the next best step for me personally, where I can have the most impact, those moments of doubt where I might have had that for myself. And we commonly talk about, leaders feeling that before they kind of have the courage to take a big step. So I'm excited to dive in with you today. So maybe you can share with us, what does leadership courage mean to you?
So that's a great question, Jamie. I think, first of all, for me, it's the willingness to take action. It's stepping forward. It's making difficult and unpopular decisions, even when you're uncomfortable doing that. And I think especially when the stakes are high, okay, whether they're personal, professional, organizational. I think leadership courage means you got the grit. And what I mean by that is, it's you can have the hard conversations and you're willing to stand up and do what needs to be done. I think it's having the humility to admit your mistakes and to ask for help. And I think it's having the resilience to stand firm when others around you may be being silent or may be quitting. I think when we talk about leadership courage, one of the misconceptions is that people think that means not being afraid. Quite the contrary. Okay. What it means is taking action and moving forward in spite of being afraid. I think that's what leadership courage is all about.
I just got chills. That's one of our values at Gig Talent is like feel the fear and do it anyway kind of a thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What is the most courageous choice you've made that you'd like to share?
Well, that's a difficult question because through the years, there have been lots of situations that required me to be courageous, and it wasn't always easy. I think one of the ones I'll talk about today is the decision to leave corporate America and start my own company. And that was difficult. And that courageous decision to quote retire, even though people would tell you I didn't retire 10 years ago, really made a difference in my life, and I think has made a difference in my clients' lives.
It's interesting. I call it preferment, by the way. You're doing what you prefer.
Yes.
And, and I think that, there's this misconception, especially 10 years ago, right? Before COVID,
Yes.
before everyone was talking about fractional and coaching wasn't as well known, right? There was this perception that if you were doing that, maybe you couldn't get a job, or maybe you were, there was kind of a negative connotation. And I think you're such an example of someone who was courageous at a time where it wasn't as commonly understood to make that leap, not because of any of those reasons, but because you were excellent at the top of your game. And quite frankly, you just wanted to have an impact in a different way.
Thank
So
you,
as you,
Jamie.
yeah, as you were leading up to that big decision, and just to give perspective, like Joan was an executive leader with a large global organization and all the things that come with that as far as measures of success. What led up to thinking about that big decision, and what were you considering as you thought about that?
So, Jamie, before I talk about me, I'd like to hit the pause button and talk about you for just a second, because, and I'm not saying this to make you feel good. I'm saying
I'm
it
like, this
because
is
it's
not on
true.
the agenda.
I know it's not, but I want to tell you. Okay, so you were ahead of your game. Okay, I can remember sitting when you were in another lifetime ago, listening to you and you talking about your vision for the future, and me leaving you knowing she's going to do it. She's going to do it. And so it's been great for me to watch you step into that. I mean, there's not a week goes by in my practice, coaching or consulting, that I don't hear the words gig talent, fractional. Okay, those were words for me until you brought them to me years ago, weren't even in my vocabulary. So I'll go ahead and answer your question, but I did want to tell you, I've seen you be that leader. I've seen you demonstrate leadership courage, and it's paid off for so many of us. So, how did I get there? What led up to it? So, first of all, as you already indicated, by society standards, I was successful. I had a dream career. I had earned the reputation of being a respected leader in a Fortune 500 company. I built a great team. I loved what I did, and I loved who I did it with. Okay. And, the last year I was working in corporate America, I traveled 90% of the time globally. I had a team of 200. I had HR responsibility for about 20,000 people. So from the outside looking in, it'd be like, why in the world would you think about making a change? And yet what happened, what started as a gentle stirring became a really strong uneasiness.
Hmm.
And what was fueling that was inside was this questions just swirling and swirling, and I couldn't silence them. And it was, um, what else can you do? How can you extend your reach? How can you make an even greater impact? Jamie, that leadership development and not only working with leaders, but working with leaders who want to create organizations where people can be and bring their best self. That's my passion. Okay.
Yeah.
So the organization I worked with was great, but I felt like my joy, my passion, and my potential were being somewhat limited because it was in those four walls. And so what I wanted to do was go out and touch. And I've been very blessed, but that's what led up. And it finally got to the point I just couldn't silence it any longer.
You're not the first guest who's mentioned that like nudge you couldn't ignore. Because I know you so well, I'm going to ask you to describe what did that actually feel like? Like,
Oh,
did you feel it in your body? Yeah.
I did. What I would say, I felt it and I heard it. So
Ooh.
I don't hear voices very often. I don't want to freak people out. Okay, but I felt it in the pit of my stomach, and it was unfamiliar and it was strong. But then I also, what I tell my clients, do you have that voice on your shoulder? Because that's where it was. And it started out quiet and then it got louder and louder. And, I'm sure we'll talk in a minute about the fears that were in my head at the time, right? Because again, I enjoyed being successful. I had the perfect job. And yet this growing volcano was like, you're not satisfied. You need to do something different.
Yeah. I I get it in the pit of my stomach too. And I talk to so many people on their journey considering different pivots and things like that. And they're always like, how will you know when it's the right time? And I just say, you will know. Like I promise you will know. But I think a lot of people feel it and don't listen, or that fear that you're mentioning that we're going to talk about like prevents them from making that leap. So what were some of those fears that were coming up for you as you were thinking about it
Yeah.
and trying to push down what was showing up for you?
And I would, Jamie, I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it right then. I would say those stirrings with me started probably over a 2-year period. Okay. And, the first thing was the dilemma was real. I already mentioned I had a great team. I worked and learned with very talented leaders. I had a network of like-minded people in the community and across the world that I worked with. And so what was happening is the very first biggest question was, what if I fail?
Ooh.
Okay. Do I have enough runway to start over again? Okay. What does that look like for me? Am I walking away from everything that I worked for my whole life? Okay.
Yeah.
So those were the kind of fears for me that were real. And I would say I had no idea, even when I stepped off that merry-go-round, as I call it, I had no idea what I was stepping into.
Mm.
And yet I will tell you, and I mentioned it already, it was the best decision I ever could make. I never looked back. I've never regretted it. I have, as late as this morning, I continue to grow and develop and love what I do. And so it doesn't get any better than that for me.
That's amazing. And those are like big, heavy things, right? Those are not like,
Yes.
oh, I might break a nail. No, these are like identity level, core level, foundational
Yes.
level fears. And yet you did it anyway. How did you know or what pushed you to do it?
Well, first of all, I did not have the support of friends and family. You know, they were looking at this successful person who was driving a nice car, and they, even though they didn't know what I made, they knew I did well for myself, and they're like, "You're crazy. Why are you doing this?" And so I think what happened to me was through that voice getting louder and that nudge getting stronger, I had the realization that playing safe
Hmm.
was riskier than taking the risk. Okay.
Ooh.
Because my whole life, even though I wasn't always in a coaching consulting role, I've always encouraged people to live the life they wanted to live, not the one their mom, their dad, their husband, their teacher, somebody else wanted. You got to find what makes your heart sing. And so the decision for me to step into that felt like the right decision. Okay. But it was still, as I said, very, very scary, very scary. So 10 years ago in March, started J.M. Clark and Company. And when I first started, I always said it wasn't about the money. It was about helping. It was about transforming. It was about making a difference. And when I stepped into it, I didn't have a big corporate staff. I didn't have an IT person. I didn't even know what business processes I needed. Oh my God. If you'd see how I started out with spreadsheets and stuff, you'd laugh. Okay.
I was
But,
with you. I get it.
but every one of those things, the branding, the websites, everything, I look back now and I'm so grateful for everybody, including you, Jamie, who were a part of my journey. And I think leadership courage too includes really being able to admit that you need help, that you don't have all the answers, and being able to admit that you're wrong or I screwed up, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's what those are the fears, and that's what prompted me to make the leap.
I think it's really significant that the not taking the leap would have potentially been a bigger risk, right? And
Yes.
that shows up in different ways, health, sanity. No, I'm just kidding. But lots of
No,
different
it
ways,
does.
right? you
Yeah.
know, and I think you mentioned something else that's really powerful, just around like people want to help, right? And
Yes.
so I know for me, I found myself being IT, and that's not my best version of myself. But but you have friends who you could call when you need to figure something out, and so that's always really good advice. So you get there, you do it, you're navigating the unknown. You go from being the expert executive to I don't even know what I need to know, and that's not a comfortable place. Um,
Yes.
what were some unexpected challenges or things that you didn't, or opportunities maybe that showed up that you didn't expect?
Yeah, I want to piggyback on something you said. I laughed and told people I went from being the go-to person to who do I go to, right?
Yes.
Because it's like you don't have all that. And when I started, it certainly wasn't glamorous. I went from having an executive office on the top floor to working at my kitchen table. Okay.
Yes.
I went from not knowing what to do or where to start. So some of those unexpected challenges, again, some of them were personal and some of them were professional. I think on the personal side, starting at ground zero, because again, you're stepping off having those resources, having those teams, having the talent, having the processes to having nothing. So starting at ground zero was a challenge. And I think for me also, starting with no team. Okay. I'm a person who's always loved having a team. I loved, I love understanding the needs of the client, rallying the troops together, working together, setting goals, achieving those goals, and then celebrating. So all of a sudden you step off. And so those were two challenges. And I think one of the things for me was what kind of business, not what was my business model, but I had to decide that too. But what kind of business person did I want to be?
Mm.
And so some of the things I started with, I reflected back on my early years in human resources. And it was like I sat across the desk, and I'm sure you did too many times, where somebody would come in, they'd be doing their sales pitch, and it's like, here's what we have to offer. And I'd listen politely, I'd ask them questions, and I'd say, well, that's not really what I need. And they'd sit there about 2 minutes, and then they'd say, but this is what we have. Okay. So one of the things that I decided when I went into business for myself is that I would always start with the customer. I'd ask, I'd listen, and then I would try to meet whatever needs they had. The second thing for me was I had no canned programs. Now, there are people who still tell me I'm crazy because they tell me I recreate the wheel every day. Now, I'm not going to tell you there aren't tools and processes that I use,
Of
okay?
course.
But there is no plug and play, okay? It starts with the customer. Then a big thing, a big part of my business was relationships, okay? And the work that I do, and I tell my clients this, is only works if it's based on mutual trust, if it's based on confidentiality. And I chose to create a business where I was a partner with someone instead of working for someone. Okay.
Mhm.
I, but when I left my previous employer, I had said for years, I will never work for anyone again. And I meant that. If I was going to work for somebody, I'd stay where I was. I wanted to partner and transform. I didn't want to work for somebody. I built my business on transparency, on confidentiality, and on identifying and helping them achieve their goals and results. So, those are some of my personal challenges too. I think were shifting my mindset because, as my disc would tell you, I'm a high D. Okay.
Really? I
So
didn't know that.
I know you would never know that. So I went from being that high D personality in the business world to now I've shifted. Okay. Because I had to shift my mindset from being the driver to being a partner, to be a consultant, to being a coach. And that took, especially because most of my life I've been a high D, it really took a conscious effort. I think another thing, and we've already talked about it, is realizing that you have a lot to learn
Mm.
and recognizing. And I can remember being really frustrated with myself. And you ought to know this. You ought to be able to do this. Why is this? Why are you sitting here without the answers? And yet,
Mm.
there again, I think that's part of leadership courage. I think you've got to say, what do we want? What do you want? And then you figure it out together.
Well, it just strikes me, that that's part of the success because anybody who's using their old playbook or, I get a lot of people give people advice, say you got to productize your offerings, right? Well, okay, like I don't know, my offering depends on what is needed, right? And it's
Yes.
going to look different. And quite frankly, we're probably going to co-create it together and it's going to be something, but like you said, of course you're leveraging your experience and that doesn't mean you're starting from zero, but that and then also that you do love working with teams and what's cool is in whether it's one-on-one in a coaching engagement that you're
Mhm.
doing or some of the bigger change and team work that you get to be part of that team because you're partnering um,
Yes.
in a different way. And I know for me it's really fulfilling, and this is like a really silly example, but I partner with an organization and my birthday was a couple weeks ago and they sent me flowers and I was at a hotel and
Beautiful.
it was very kind, but it struck me like very emotionally because like I'm like I am part of this team, and so it shows up differently and I love that you're feeling those, but when you stepped out, you didn't know, you didn't know that's how it was going to feel or if you would have that materialize. So I love that. So, I happen to know that part of your goals when you stepped out 10 years ago, you knew you were going to write a book or you had a vision to write a
I
book.
do.
But and that's not an easy feat either. Maybe share a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to write Common Sense Leadership.
Yeah. So first of all, I've been writing since I was a kid, but it was more poems and those kind of things. And I really thought my first book would be a memoir. Okay.
Mm.
Had
I
no
still
idea.
want that to come. Is that coming?
It is coming. As a matter of fact, I've started on it. So
Okay, good.
yes. So my first, I had no idea that I was going to write this book first. I had actually started on the memoir already. And I don't have any children of my own, and yet I've been really blessed that I have nieces and nephews that I'm incredibly proud of. And so one of my nephews is a leader and he was expanding his team. And so he called me and he said, and he calls me Nana. It's like, so Nana, what books would you think to help a new leader? I'm probably going to take a member of the team who has little to no experience. And so I'm thinking about how can I help you? I said, well, that's a great question. It sounds like an easy question, right? I'm a reader, lifelong reader. If you look at my house, it looks like I live in a book. Okay.
Yeah, you can
Because
see
I,
behind me, right? Yeah.
that's right. I have books, and you too. I have books everywhere. So I said, let me think about it a day or two. So I went through my library and perused what I had. Even though there were great insights, there was nothing that fit the bill. Okay. And I knew what I wanted. I wanted something simple. I wanted to keep it basic. And the question I asked myself is what would be the most help to somebody who wants to be a leader, to somebody who is an early career leader, to a person managing one of those folks, and to talent developers. Okay. And so I started thinking about it that way. And so I've told my nephew, I actually dedicated the book to him. I said, it was a blessing and a curse. Okay. Because once I started, it was like that nudge to leave corporate America. Once it got hold of me, I couldn't turn loose of it. And I was so blessed. I worked with great editors. I interviewed people for the book, right? People gave me quotes, just like yourself, and people were so supportive. And so that's what I started to do. And the book is straightforward, and it's now out on ebook and in printed version, and soon to be on Audible. So we're still working on it as we go.
You know, I haven't even shared this with you, but it was like 2 weeks after it came out, I had met with someone who had recently been promoted into a manager role at a large organization in New York. And he had asked me the same thing. He said, "Hey, do you have any books that you recommend?" And I mean, I've written books, right? But I was
Right.
like, but for what he needed, there wasn't the perfect thing, right? And people don't have like if I had said, "Here's 10," they don't really. That's not what they're looking for. So I actually gave him your book,
Oh,
and
thank
it
you.
was perfect. Yeah, no, it really was perfect, and I think it can, meet leaders where they are today. It's really timely. I think one of the things that I sometimes have found is that when I'm trying to help leaders grow, I make assumptions around
Yes.
starting points and they just don't have it. And it's not their fault. It's because of the change that the workforce has experienced over the last 5 years and really beyond that. Um, and so I love that your book, I think, it can meet people where they are, give those actionable steps, boost their confidence to just find their authentic leadership style, but with some support and in the process that you outlined. So I haven't shared that with you, but it was fun and
Thank
it was
you.
really timely. Yeah. So I hope lots of people are doing that.
Well, some of the feedback I've gotten has been wonderful, especially from early career folks. I have a early career vice president at a bank, and one of the things that he said is, "I love that I don't have to worry about picking up where I left off. I
Oh
can
yeah.
read 10 pages, I can read 20 pages, and I'm good." I had people over and over again who said, "I wish I'd had this when I started my career." I have people saying, "I bought a copy for my granddaughter or my, whatever." And so the feedback has been good, and I'm very pleased. And I think it still is evolving and getting into the hands that it's supposed to be in.
Yeah. And it's great because you can use it with individuals and I know you're using
Yes.
it with teams as well, which is wonderful. So overall, what have you learned about courage, leadership, and resilience?
Well, that's what leadership's all about, isn't it? Those three words. It is. So I think with courage, one of the things is it's a muscle, not a moment in time.
Mm,
People think, oh, I just have to demonstrate courage today. No, you build courage one decision, one day, one step at a time. And the more you practice, the stronger it gets. And so I think it's kind of like riding that bicycle. You get on it to start with. You may not be very good, but the more you ride it, the better you are. I think leadership, one of the things that I've always held on to, but I didn't realize it until later in life, is as a leader, you're on all the time. Okay.
yeah.
It's not when you're just holding a meeting. It's not when you're doing a performance evaluation. If you're walking down the hall, there's eyes and ears on you. Okay. And the things that you don't take action on or you don't do sometimes speak louder than the words that you're saying. And so I think for me, that's a big thing when it comes to leadership. Resilience, what I would say about that is it's not just about getting over it, it's about growing through it. Okay.
Ooh.
I tell people all the time what we need to do is visit the past long enough to learn from it and move on. If you don't hit the pause button and reflect, you've missed an opportunity. And you're going to keep, the potential is you can keep committing those same mistakes over and over again. So I think stopping, looking back, and then again, not taking to your sick bed, right? Because sometimes, at least in my early career, I can remember if I'll give you an example. The organization that I was working for, the corporate office was in Cleveland. And, I was there for a week. I get on a plane flying from Cleveland back to Orange County, and I beat myself up all the way home about why did I say that? What did I do? Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And what I say is, I knew I was getting healthier when the beating stopped somewhere over Denver. Okay.
Oh, that's great.
So, because again, it's looking back, but there's no sense in wallowing in it. Okay. And a lot of times we're harder on ourselves than anybody else is hard on us. So I think resilience is a big thing.
Yeah, and I know, that your personal journey, is going to have a lot of resilient stories and show how you grew through it. And so
Yes.
I look forward to hearing that when you write your memoir as well.
Thank
So,
you.
yes, thank you. What In closing, I would love for you to share some advice that you have for leaders who are wanting to make a difference.
So the first thing I would say is it goes back to what I included in the book. Okay. Because again, I tried to give people what I thought they needed for the foundations of leadership. I think you got to know your who. Who are you? Who do you want to be? Who do you serve? Who's your team? Who can you depend on to be your personal board of directors? So know your who. I think the second thing is to know your why. Why do you get up in the morning? Is it your family? Is it the job? Is it the clients you serve? What's your purpose? What drives you? What keeps you going? Is knowing your what. And I think I outlined that in the book. What are leaders supposed to do? What are the expectations that we have of them? How do we measure them? The other one, and this is probably the biggest one, is to know your how. And that is tied to your values, the strategies, the tips, the practices, and the tools. So I think all of those things go together to help you be a better leader. And for me, when leaders start working their way through that, and by the way, I'll put a plug in for the book. I think one of the best tools and ways to use the book is to facilitate conversations between managers and their direct reports, or between talent developers and direct reports. And I've said this all along. If my book only gets to a reader, that'll be great, but I will feel like I've missed the mark, because the mark is the continuous learning that happens through conversation. It's the manager and the leader. It's groups of early career leaders getting together and sharing their thoughts. And I envision it where you have a direct report and you buy them a copy of the book and you say, "I'd like you to read chapter 1, and when we meet week after next, let's talk about it."
That's
Okay,
cool.
so that's how I envision. And so my sage advice would be to buy the book, and not just buy it and listen or read it, but apply what you learn.
I could see like a peer reading circle with early managers, right? Like we're
Yes.
so focused on how do we help leaders develop, but if they they're driven to learn themselves. So yeah, that could be a cool idea.
So I was in Orange County facilitating a retreat this week, and like you, Jamie, I got home. I drove back last night. I got home, and when I opened my email, was this beautiful card from the team that said, "You're amazing. We thank you for that. You inspired us. You got us to talking. You did all these things." That's what makes your heart sing. But yet, what you also see is that next level. First of all, they're in tune, they're listening, they're talking. And what I say is, I don't have the answers. I ask the right questions and I hold space. So,
You are brilliant at holding space, and I'm super grateful for you joining us today. For those listeners who may want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So thanks for asking. So for those of you who are listening, you might not be ready to start a new job or start your own business or any of the things we talked about. But if anything resonated today, what I would say, I'd invite you to visit my website. It's jmclark.com. And you'll find all kinds of resources there. I have a blog series, so all my past blogs are there. You can also get a copy of the book there. And if you order the book, sign up for my newsletter. And if you do that, sign up for the newsletter, I'll send you, thanks to Jamie, I created a new tool. And the new tool is Courageous Leadership Checklist, 5 essential steps for making a courageous leadership choice. So sign up for the newsletter. I'll get that to you. And I'd love to hear from you. Again, Jamie knows what makes me sing and makes my heart sing is to see people grow and develop. So I'd love to hear your stories. Jamie, I again, thank you for having me today. Thank you for being courageous years ago to start Gig Talent and all the other things you've done, your board of director activities. Thank you for starting this podcast because I think there are plenty of people like myself. I look forward to listening to everybody else, to listening and learning. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Joan. It's always an honor to be with you, and I appreciate it so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you all in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Courageous Choice. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review to help get the word out about the podcast. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our future conversations. If you'd like to know more about Gig Talent, please visit gigtalentagency.com or email us at podcast@gigtalentagency.com. See you in the next episode.